Hello guys, welcome to Tales of Cindy. I'm your host Cindy, and I wanted to get on here and talk about the Trans Day of Visibility. Today is March 31st, which is the International Trans Day of Visibility. Right now, the trans community throughout the world, but particularly in the US and the UK, are going through a rough time. I know that in the United States, the trans community was really hopeful that the replacement of Donald Trump would mean that there would be less attacks on the trans community outright and in our faces. However, what has happened in the last few months has shown that there's an undercurrent of transphobia in the United States and throughout the world that is pretty hurtful. Today's post isn't for the trans community. While I value them and support them, I'm not making this video for them. They know what's going on. Today's post isn't really for a lot of the LGBTQ community, though it is for some of you. If you're a true trans ally, you really don't need this. If you find yourself in any way, shape, or form supporting the bills that have been passed recently to limit the rights of trans people throughout the United States and throughout the world, this post is for you. This post is being made by me, someone who grew up conservative, someone who grew up being fed the exact same narratives that you have been fed. This post is for you from somebody who has been where you are. Okay? As somebody who has been fed the fear-mongering that you are now hearing, I want to tell you more of what's really going on. Okay. I grew up in a very conservative area of the United States. Matter of fact, with the most recent bills that have been passed, the first one that was passed was in Utah, which is where I grew up. I grew up in a culture that believes that gender is inherent to who you are eternally, not just this life, but eternally. When I was only 6 years old, our prophet of the LDS Church got up in conference and read a document called the Family Proclamation to the World, which in it says that gender is an internal piece of who you are. There is not a group on the planet that holds more inherent transphobia than the Mormons. And I know there are going to be Mormons who are going to react to that really strongly because they don't feel like they're transphobic. And that may be true that individual Mormons are not transphobic, but the religion as a whole is incredibly transphobic. Anyone who believes they're transgender is believed to be deluded, misguided, unaware, etc., etc., etc. Because gender is eternal, right? There's not a group on the planet that holds in its realm more transphobia than Mormonism. It just doesn't. For example, this is what I'm talking about. It's so structurally ingrained to be transphobic that it is impossible for you to change your nickname on the app that has all of your information. That app, I was really struggling because I was so tired of people calling me my full name, Cynthia. I hate being called Cynthia. I hate it with a passion. Yet, I can't get that changed to be called Cindy on the app. Because if they allowed me to change my name to Cindy, they would also have to allow trans people to change their names. And they're not willing to do that. Trans people, when they come out, even if they stay in the church for the rest of their lives, will be dead named. even if they legally change their name, the church has been known to not respect that, to continue to detonate them. That's the culture I grew up in, okay? That's the culture that a lot of my viewers find themselves coming from or in. A culture where you're inherently who you are, so any attempt to change that and to become a better version of yourself, if it crosses out of those lines, is no longer appropriate. The reason I'm sharing this isn't because I want to trash on the LDS church. The reason I'm sharing this isn't because I want to trash on anybody else. The reason I'm sharing this is because I want you to see that I understand, because I grew up there. I know exactly what kind of thoughts you're having about trans people. I grew up watching the exact same 90s movies where the bad guy turned out to be a man in a dress. I grew up watching the same things, hearing the same stories. I grew up with the same fears. I know where your fears are coming from. And I'm here to tell you they're wrong. Nothing you have heard about trans people, from the bathroom debate, to the sports debate, to the puberty blockers, is the truth. If you're a conservative and have been listening to conservative news, I promise you, you are missing out on the reality of the situation that is happening across this country and in the lives of hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people. Millions of people. Okay? And I'm not saying this because I want to trash on people. Like I said, I'm saying this because until recently, I was just like you. Just like you. A few years ago, somebody I love very dearly came to me and said, I think I'm non-binary. And I didn't know what that meant. I knew it had something to do with trans stuff, but I didn't know what it meant. So I listened. And essentially, from their perspective, the way that they initially described it to me is that they didn't feel like they were a man or a woman. And I could not wrap my head around that. I grew up in a culture where you were a man or a woman, and your roles for eternity are defined by whether you're a man or a woman. So how could you be anything but a man or a woman? And I am not an asshole. I'm not. So I respected them and let them define themselves as transgender. And I even started using they, them pronouns because that's what they wanted. At least I did in front of them. I was very good in front of them about using they, them pronouns. It was a little difficult for me at first because they chose to not come out to everybody. I was one of the first people they came out to. And so in front of other people, I would have to use she, her pronouns. And I had a hard time switching back between they, them, and she, her. It was hard for me. But I did my best to continue to use they, them in respect for them in the situations that they wanted. And because I loved and I valued this person, I was willing to listen. And as I listened, I still didn't understand it all. But I knew one thing was true. They truly believed they did not fit in the gender norm. That the gender they had been assigned at birth was not the gender they were. So initially my response to that was, okay, that's something they believe, and therefore I'll respect that. And I respected that. And I respected that. But I was still problematic, guys. I was still problematic. I feel terrible that the Cindy of a couple years ago was one of the best and most supportive people in this person's life. Because the Cindy of a couple years ago still held some pretty strong transphobic ideas in my head. I did the best I could, but I didn't really understand. For example, I remember realizing a few years ago that if I had a child who came out as transgender, that I would let my child transition socially. But I wasn't okay with them doing anything that would permanently change themselves as a minor. And your brain, some of you conservatives are like, oh, that's a good thing, right? You shouldn't let your child permanently do something that changes them, that they may regret, because children are stupid sometimes. But do you know who else is stupid sometimes? Adults. This friend of mine who is transgender educated me. Puberty blockers. The thing that just got banned in the UK. The thing that's being banned in states across the US, or is up for debate about being banned in the United States, actually makes it so that children are less likely to make permanent decisions. Yes, it does make it so that puberty doesn't happen. But do you know what? If a kid goes on puberty blockers as a 12-year-old and never experiences puberty, as an adult, that door is still open for them. That door is wide open. I don't think cis people understand how amazing hormones are. I don't think cis people are aware what hormones can do. If I, as a 12-year-old, never went through puberty, so I never grew breasts, right? My voice wouldn't change anyways, aside from about birth. And as a 23-year-old, I decide that I'm not transgender after all, and I want to go through puberty. I just start taking estrogen and let my natural body's estrogen kick in, and I can go through puberty. Yeah, it's a little late, but guess what? I will look, talk, and sound like a woman. Or what about a teenage boy who thinks he's non-binary and then becomes an adult and realizes, you know what? I really want to be a dude. I really am a dude. I'm a dude. All that dude has to do to go from having a higher pitched voice and no facial hair that the puberty blockers would make him have is go on testosterone for a little while. It'll take a few years, sure, because puberty takes a few years. But he will be able to exist as a man for the rest of his life in men's spaces if that's what he wants to do. Puberty blockers, all they do is put it on hold. They put the decision on hold. So these children don't have to go through these phases of going through puberty and watching the wrong body parts develop. It's puberty blockers are trying to give trans kids the right to make that decision when they're adults. And we're taking that away from them? Why? Puberty blockers are the recommended treatment for trans kids. It's not making permanent decisions for them. It's putting the decision on hold until they're adults. So that if they choose to stay the assigned gender at birth, if that's what they feel they are as an adult, they can be that. But if they were right at 12 or 13, which a hell of a lot of them are, and I would say way more than 90% of them are, then they can continue the transition process as an adult, receiving the affirming care that they need. That's what puberty blockers do. And we're trying to ban that. It's ridiculous. But it's because we don't understand as cis people what it's like to go on hormones. And I don't blame you for not understanding that, because until I was educated by my friend, I didn't know either. Why? Because we talk about it in terms of the conservative media as we're taking this choice away from children, when instead puberty blockers are giving this choice. So we've taken this choice away from children by banning puberty blockers. We've also taken this choice away from parents. Parents who are trying to support their children are legally not allowed to in Arkansas. They are legally banned from making the best decision they think is fair for their children. And here I am listening to the same conservatives who demand that we cannot mandate vaccination because it takes choice away from parents and individuals, also telling me that we can ban puberty blockers, which again takes the choice away from parents and individuals. If you think mandatory vaccination should not be a thing because of individual rights, you should be up in arms about puberty blockers being banned because it takes away parental choice and individual rights. So anyway, a couple years ago, I was schooled on puberty blockers. Even then, I was still a problematic ally of trans people. Here I have one of the closest people in my life out as trans, and I was still problematic. And I would say that a vast majority of cis people who have somebody out in their life as trans are still problematic. It's not because they want to be. It's not because you guys are jerks. It's not because I was a jerk. Because I just don't know better. Because on the one side, you have this one person you support who's out as trans. But on the other side, you're getting fed these narratives, these really, really strong fear narratives that support your fears and your inherent beliefs. Trans people are 100% right saying that cis people should and can be better. But sometimes trans people also forget how strong these narratives are that you're trying to overcome to become better. 100%, the journey and the expectation for you to become better is on you. It's not on the trans people. Trans people should not have to educate you. You should not be reaching out to trans people to educate you on all of this. The internet exists. You should be looking at trans supporting sources, not just TERF sources, trans supporting sources that talk about trans stories. If you have a trans woman in your life who you love and you have not read Whipping Girl, you have not done your job of being a trans ally. There are so many resources available. And the problem is, too many of my conservative friends are stuck in a conservative loop where they only listen to conservative sources. And what that means is they hear things like JK Rowling's speech, or I guess it wasn't a speech, her Twitter tirade last summer. And they believe, well, that sounds legitimate. And it does on the surface level if you know nothing about what trans people really experience. On a very base surface level, she's hitting all the talking points that have been hidden in conservative spaces for years and years and years and years and years. So yeah, on a surface level, it does sound good. Until you delve in deeper. I have in my link below a video. If you are wanting to be a trans ally and you do not watch this video and have not watched a similar video, you're not really a trans ally. If you're not willing to spend an hour of your life to watch this video, you're not a trans ally. Where it goes point by point through JK Rowling's speech. I guess speech is, I don't know what the right word is. It goes point by point through her declaration and shows you why it's full of crap. With sources. JK Rowling's memorandum, or whatever it was, doesn't have a single source. It may sound good. I can spew bullshit that sounds good left and right. The people who made the video, JammiDodger and his wife, his cis wife, they found sources to back themselves up. So, if you want to be a trans ally, watch that video. My point is, there's a lot of good sources out there, but there's also a lot of crap. And the crap carries the same fear narrative. And I'm here to say that trans people are not who you should be afraid of. They're just not. Over the course of me coming out over the last year, I have been so incredibly blessed to meet so many amazing trans people. Trans women, trans men, non-binary people. And the biggest thing I have learned is that I still hold ideas, despite having one of the closest people in my life. I still hold problematic ideas, and I'm constantly working on overcoming them. It doesn't make you a bad person. It didn't make me a bad person. But if you're not willing to constantly challenge your beliefs, to learn and to grow, to stretch yourself, you're kind of holding yourself back in life. Because that's the whole point of this life. Frankly, it is. I don't care if you're religious or not religious. At the end of your life, if you have not learned and grown and become a better person, you screwed up. That's it. And that includes in how you treat trans people, how you understand trans people. If you're a Christian and you're not spending time listening to trans people in order to understand them and love them better, you're not doing a very good job of being a Christian. Because if you think Jesus wouldn't be out there among the trans men and women and non-binary folk that I know, you don't believe in the Jesus of the New Testament. You don't believe in the Jesus of the Gospels. The Jesus of the Gospels, these are his people. These are his sheep. These are the lost sheep that he's been talking about. And I'm not talking about bringing them back into the fold of Christianity. I'm talking about bringing them back into the fold of love, which is what Christianity should be, but it's often not. There's a cartoon that I saw that had a fold of sheep and Jesus carrying a sheep over his shoulder coming up. And the sheep in the fold said, "Whoa, whoa, we kicked her out." And Jesus says, "Yeah, and I found him." That's the Jesus I believe in. A Jesus who would be out there looking for the lost sheep, looking for the trans people, not to make them less trans, but to help them know that they are loved and valued. I'm not here to tell you a trans person's story. That's not what I'm here to tell you today. What I'm here to tell you today is the story of somebody who learned and grew. The story of somebody who can no longer hear the plight of the trans brothers and sisters and non-binary folk without wanting to do something. I can't sit back anymore. I can't sit passively and watch while these people suffer, not in silence. They're being loud. They're having to speak for themselves. I'm tired of watching them be stomped on and ignored. I will never sit passively by again. Trans people are my brothers and my sisters and my siblings. I believe in a God where we're all his children, including my trans siblings, especially my trans siblings. So today is the Transgender Day of Visibility. And I challenge you to shut up and listen. Ignore what your voice says. Ignore the fear-mongering that's being pushed on you. Listen to the stories of actual transgender people. Listen to the stories of those who are actually dealing with these laws, those who have experiences on puberty blockers, those who don't, those who wish they could have had it. All of these things. Listen to their stories. Listen to their stories. They're there. They're right there. They're talking loud. Listen to them. Challenge yourself and your preconceived notions about what it means to be a gender. It's not about genitalia, I promise you that. If it was about genitalia, then somebody who's castrated all of a sudden no longer is a man. And I promise you, that's not what somebody who's castrated feels. It's not about genitalia. So challenge your beliefs about what it is to be a man or a woman if you believe you are an ally of trans people and you have not spoken up visibly and loudly in defense of trans rights. You're not a trans ally. Cis people, it's time. It's time. Use your voices, because nobody's listening to the trans kids who are saying what they're going to lose. So, cis people, elevate your voice and use it to elevate the voices of trans people. If you don't know who that is, if you don't know what trans people you should be listening to, I have a suggestion. Go on my Twitter and see who I'm following. Those are some trans people you should be listening to. If you don't know any trans people, I have a suggestion. Go on YouTube. Use the link of the people I have below who have trans channels that are good and listen to their stories. It's time to listen and use your voice to support those who are having their rights stripped away from them. On this Transgender Day of Visibility, I am standing and saying I support trans rights today and forever. And I challenge you to find it in yourself to do the same. Thank you.